And Solomon said unto the Lord, Give thy servant an understanding heart, to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this? So great a people.
The Solomon Seat, an examination of the courts of Oklahoma, dedicated to the men who judge for the people of the state and to the justice with which they are entrusted.
We begin with a man. He is 34 years old. He has been chronically unemployed for years. He's married. He has 3 children. A few weeks ago, he committed a crime against the law. He was arrested by the police. He admits the crime. The public defender has asked for mercy. The prosecutor has asked for justice. All other men have done with him. But now you, the judge, must prescribe the punishment. Would you find it difficult? Would you, like Solomon, pray for an understanding heart to discern between good and bad? There are men in Oklahoma who have to make that decision, some of them many times a day. And no doubt they often feel that only a Solomon could answer to the exacting demands put upon them. But as Robert Ingersoll once commented, we must remember that we have to make judges out of men, and that by being judges, their prejudices are not diminished, and their intelligence is not increased. Certainly no judge would argue that point. And so we must depend upon a system of justice, a system of the courts to help them. And modern justice requires much more than an understanding heart. It requires money, statistics, men of high caliber, but above all, it requires a logical, modern, well-arranged system designed to hear the complaints of the people. Or, as Thomas Jefferson put it, to exact equal justice of all men. Many Oklahoma judges and lawyers recognize that, like any institutions, our courts are in need of some repair. Just how much repair is a matter of debate. But these men who live and work with the courts would like to interest laymen, that's you and me, in deciding what changes are in order. As laymen, we have developed a healthy regard for this figure. We wisely hesitate to criticize anything about it. But the products of men can always bear examination. This is a diagram of the court system of Oklahoma. The lines trace the paths which cases take on their way to the higher courts and eventually the state Supreme Court. If you find the diagram confusing, don't be disturbed. It's a perfectly normal reaction. It is confusing, and many think unnecessarily so. At the bottom of the chart are the courts of least authority: traffic, police, justice of the peace. Above that level are the district courts and county courts, superior, children's, courts of common pleas. Many have overlapping jurisdictions and conflicting areas of operation. Some of these courts have been added by the legislature much as you might add a room to your house, until the entire organization, the entire structure, is shackled by its organization. There are, as nearly as we can determine, about 610 of these courts in Oklahoma. The exact number is unknown because no one keeps a complete record of the Justice of Peace courts. We believe there are about 645 judges in this state. Now that compares with 267 judges in Missouri, a state somewhat larger than our own. In a year's time, these courts will hear some 32,000 cases and dispose of millions of dollars in property and thousands of lives. If one must choose one overwhelming problem of our courts, we could start with organization. A court, after all, is only a place for dispensing justice. And at the risk of offending the scholar of the law, we might call the court a justice factory. Much the same as we could call this an automobile factory. Let's look at this one. It's a busy factory, working all day to turn out automobiles. But it, too, has a problem. These are the workers. They're busy men, too busy, really, in fact, overworked. But no one has authority to help them out. This man isn't busy, but even if he wanted to help, he couldn't. This man makes wheels, but his designs are a little different. Without communication with the other wheel makers, he doesn't know what's being done. This man is working with machinery he doesn't fully understand. Next to him is an expert in that field, but he's assigned a simpler task. Everybody works hard, they're all conscientious, but because of a lack of organization and communication, the end product frequently needs revising. If the automobile were a court case, it would have to be appealed at much expense and trouble. Well, does the same thing apply to the Oklahoma court system? In a sense, yes. The Oklahoma State Supreme Court has little actual authority over the lower courts in the matter of administration. If a judge below the district court level gets a backlog of cases, there is no one available to help him. There is no system of reliable statistics to determine the average workload or even in some cases proper sentences. Judges may not be assigned to cases on which they might be expert. Each judge is independently elected and independent of each of his neighbors. The federal courts and some state courts have already solved this problem. Chief Justice Earl Welch of the State Supreme Court explains one system.
I think the best system that I know anything about would be to have a court administrator, a separate, a special office, a man who would be appointed, and usually appointed by the Chief Justice or by the Supreme Court in states and in the nation, who would act as an administrator for all of the courts. He could readily correlate the dockets of the state. He could know at the end of each month by reports the number of cases pending, whether criminal cases, civil cases, divorce cases. He'd know when a judge was overworked or a district was overcrowded in its docket and needed a new judge or needed an assigned supernumerary judge. And if he would do that and act in an advisory capacity to the courts and to the Supreme Court and to the Chief Justice and to the legislature. And that's about the way the administrator operates over all the federal courts. And several of the states have a court administrator. It's very, very well worth the cost it would be to the administration of justice, and I think would be a plan well worth trying in Oklahoma.
Judges should always render independent decisions, but the type of organization suggested by Justice Welch would help bring some order to the system. And now what happens in a court system when every court is disconnected from its neighbors? This is the town of Antlers, Oklahoma, in the southeastern part of our state. It's the county seat of Pushmataha County. And like the other 76 counties of our state, this one has a county court and an elected county judge. But there hasn't been a jury term in county court since 1943. We're not sure when the last term was. The present court clerk was elected in 1943, and she can account only that far. This doesn't mean that Antlers is a lawless town. Cases are filed somewhere else when necessary. The county judge has some other duties besides holding court. and Pushmataha County is a low valuation county where it's difficult to raise enough tax money to support such things as court sessions. But whatever the reason, the county court at Antlers is one example of what happens to a court isolated from our judicial system. There are excellent courts in Oklahoma, however, and one which is nationally recognized is the Oklahoma County District Court. Judge Fred Daugherty is one of its members.
Judge Daugherty, the Oklahoma District Court has a reputation far and wide, I understand, as being a very good court. Can you explain why that would be?
I assume, Gene, that you're speaking of the reputation in getting our cases to trial sooner than any other court of our size across the nation.
That's right.
Oh, I would say, Gene, that two basic reasons are responsible for that. One is that the judges in our court here work at the job. We give the people a full day's work for every day that we're on duty here. And secondly, the judges have amongst themselves a fine spirit of cooperation and a harmonious relationship to where when we set a jury docket, we all pitch in to try these cases. It doesn't make any difference whose docket they might have originally been set on. We sound our dockets, and if we dispose of all the cases and another judge is not so fortunate, we take docket responsibility in his case, and by that means we are able to get rid of all jury cases.
How long does it take to get a case through, an average case through this court?
I would say an average case will run a day and a half. Some cases we can get through in a jury trial in a day. Some, like the one that I have just finished today, took 2.5 days. So it depends upon the case.
Well, now taking a case from the very beginning and running it through the entire filing and the trial system, about how long does it take to bring a case to trial?
From the time of filing?
Yes.
From the time of filing to the time of actual trial in a jury-type case, we accomplish that in this county in something less than 6 months as a general rule.
How does that compare with other cities over the country?
It compares most favorably. In cities like Los Angeles, it takes from 3 to 4 years to get a case of this kind to trial. The same thing applies to courts back east and up north. It takes several years to get a case to trial.
Qualification of judges is another problem of the Oklahoma court system. For one thing, some 500 of our judges are not required to have any legal understanding or training whatsoever. For these 500, the only qualification of any kind is that of residence and election. These are our justices of the peace.
Joe Kelly, wilt thou take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou love her, honor her, keep her, and be true and loyal to her as long as you both shall live? Miss Katie...
This is one of Oklahoma's justices of the peace, performing one of the duties assigned him by law. Peace Charlie Linn, for the past 10 years a JP at Durant. Like all JPs, he receives no salaries for his duties, relying instead on fees for services performed. He must be a resident of his district, but he need have no legal experience. Although the JP courts are the lowest on the ladder, they are the ones you are most likely to come in contact with.
Place that on a finger. Miss Katie, do you receive the ring to fulfill the vows and pledges that you've made? Joining right hands again. In view of the vows and pledges that you've made each other, I, as a servant of the state of Oklahoma, do now pronounce you husband and wife.
Judge, if you were going to change the setup of the judicial system in Oklahoma as in relation to the justice of the peace, would you make any changes in the job or the qualifications of the job or the people who hold it? in order to make your job easier or to do a better job?
Well, I don't believe so. I believe it's all right.
You think it works
I'm
for them?
satisfied the way it's going.
Do you have any particular problems as a justice of the peace that if you had your druthers you could fix up?
No, I believe it's good enough. I think it's right in line with this office. And all cases, traffic cases, we use our own judgment, you know, as to the amount of fine and so forth.
Some lawyers have said from time to time that justice of the peace should be required to have legal training. Do you think that's a good policy?
It's a good policy, I'll agree.
So far, we have found out that two of our problems are an unwieldy court system and justices of the peace with no legal qualifications. But there are other problems. For example, the way we select our judges. In Oklahoma, the judge is elected in the same way that the county attorney, the county sheriff, the county surveyor is elected. Oklahoma, which has a longer ballot than any other known government in the world, elects its judges. Chief Justice Earl Welch.
You were elected to your office. Do you think that such election is good for the judicial system?
Well, it has really proven surprisingly good in Oklahoma for 50 years. But I think the Missouri plan of the election of judges is a better plan, and that really is an elective plan by the people, but it's, as you know, substantially different from our plan.
How much time did you devote to your last campaign?
About 2 to 2.5 months. My district is rather far removed from the center of the state. My district is the southeastern 8 counties in Oklahoma, and you can't operate a campaign from Oklahoma City. So I had to take out and go into my district and spend time there campaigning, and of course had to take that time away from my work.
That's 2 months' time when you were not available for any judicial duties.
I was only available in extraordinary matters or emergencies. They knew where to get me at all times, and they did call me in a time or two during that period and could have called me any week. But they didn't need to and didn't do it.
Would you say that the 2 months period is an average period of time for judges at most levels?
Yes. Yes, it is. That's May and June. The filing period ends about the 1st of May, and the election comes very early in July, so that's the months of May and June, plus a little bit of May and a little bit of July. But that's about the minimum in which they can really make their campaigns. And in justice to themselves and to the courts they represent, they must make those campaigns.
Of course, judges should be subject to the approval of the people in some manner, and other states have found ways of doing this without subjecting the court to a political campaign. We'll explore some of those ways in the second part of our report next Sunday afternoon. So far, all of the problems of our court system which we have discussed would require extensive legislation or constitutional changes to correct. But there are some things which are a bit simpler. For example, our courts have no system of operation, no code of ethics. Mr. John Hailey, a prominent local attorney and past president of the Bar Association.
Mr. Howley, do the Oklahoma courts have any uniform rules of procedure?
They do not.
What steps could be taken to correct this?
The adoption by the Supreme Court of uniform rules of procedure to govern all the courts of record in the state.
Well, why should Oklahoma's courts have uniform rules of procedure?
Many lawyers have clients in various parts of the state and have lawsuits in various parts of the state. Each court makes its own rules under the present practice. I'll give you one instance. Many courts in the state require 30 days before they will hear a divorce case. Other courts, for instance in Oklahoma County, we have a rule where there are children involved, there's a waiting period. Some courts have no waiting period at all. If a lawyer has a case in a foreign county, he ought to be able to know what the rules of that court are so that he will not have to make useless trips, for one thing, and cause useless expense to his clients.
Well, now, we have always thought of the judiciary and the law as a very ethical profession, and yet I see that the Bar Association here in Oklahoma is pressing for adoption of a code of ethics. Do the courts of Oklahoma have no such code at the present time?
The courts of Oklahoma have no regularly adopted canons of ethics. Each judge is the judge of his own conduct, which in the main works fine. But the American Bar Association has adopted a judicial canon of ethics for the governance of judges, which is in general use throughout the United States, and we think that Oklahoma ought to be in line with the rest of the states.
Mm-hmm. Most of the states have adopted such a code?
Most of the states have adopted these canons.
Mm-hmm. What is the present status of your efforts at this time?
We have on file with the Supreme Court of Oklahoma a resolution adopted by the House of Delegates of the Oklahoma Bar Association in December in Oklahoma City, asking the court to adopt the canons of ethics of the American Bar Association. We have, however, called to their attention the fact that Canon 35 is under reconsideration by the American Bar Association.
This is the canon that refers to taking of photographs in courtrooms?
That is correct. And we have suggested that it would be proper for the court, if it so desires, to wait action on that canon until the American Bar meets in Los Angeles in August of this year.
Can you give me an example of what these canons might do for a judge in helping him do his job?
Yes, a very ordinary example, I think, is this. Nearly all of us, both lawyers and laymen, have friends among the judiciary. Many laymen cannot understand why they should not go to a friend who is a judge and discuss a case that they've got in court. But under the canons of ethics adopted by the American Bar Association, that's improper. The judge would have to explain that, and if he had a written code to which he could refer, the layman would understand that somewhat better than the judge merely saying that he didn't feel like he should discuss it.
Do you think Oklahoma's judges are subject to much political pressure?
I suppose not more than any judge. There isn't any man in any business that somebody doesn't try to pressure one way or the other. Naturally, when a case comes before a court that excites a great deal of popular clamor, it's hard for him not to be influenced by it, if he's human at all. I don't know exactly what political influence means, except that it's human influence, and none of us can completely disregard that.
You may wonder if, with all the other troubles of the world, you can afford to worry very much about all this. You have never had a part of your life in the hands of a judge. If you had, you would understand the feeling of knowing that you stood before a fair, impartial man. Suppose you were the man with whom we began, or suppose you were a friend or a relative. You would know then the responsibility involved. A judge can send you to prison or release you. He can find you insane, marry you, or dissolve that marriage. A judge can give you children by adoption or take your own children away. A judge can make you sign your name, allow you to put up a house, make you tear your own house down. He can determine your taxes, declare you bankrupt. He may foreclose your home, attach your salary, and when you die, probate your will. If he wrongs you, you can appeal, of course, but always to another judge. The man on the bench represents the third great pillar of our government. The legislature is a politically elected body. It might infringe upon your rights. The executive is a politically elected official. He might support them against you. But as long as you can turn to an honest and free system of courts, you need have no fear for your property, for your freedom, or for your life. But if the courts should become corrupted, you have no other place to turn. There are ways to correct all the defects of our court system here in Oklahoma, and two organizations, the Oklahoma Bar Association and the League of Women Voters, are studying ways to do just that. For example, the Bar Association would like to form a lawyer and layman's committee to make constructive suggestions about our legal system, but they will need your support. And next week, in part 2 of this program, we will look at some possible changes in our courts and meet some of the people best informed on that subject. For example, with us next week will be Chief Justice Earl Welch, Dr. H.V. Thornton of Oklahoma University, Mrs. James Arnott of the League of Women Voters, Vern Bowman, a local attorney, and John Cantrell, past president of the Oklahoma Bar Association. If what you have seen today makes you want to help, be sure to be with us next Sunday afternoon at 2:30. The courts of our state are a greater monument to our wisdom than any buildings we could possibly erect, and they are worthy of our finest efforts. John Ruskin was speaking of such a monument to the future when he wrote,
Let us think as we lay stone on stone that a time is to come when those stones will be held sacred because our hands have touched them, and that men will say as they look upon the labor, See, this our fathers did for us.
The Solomon Seat was produced with the cooperation of the League of Women Voters of Oklahoma City and the Oklahoma Bar Association, presented by the Public Affairs Department of WKY-TV. Next week, part 2 of The Solomon Seat.